Welcome to ReReview, where we watch movies from our past with a perspective from today. Your hosts are Matt, Bobby, and Austin, and we love the films from our youth, so we're taking a look back to see if they still hold up. On this episode, we're discussing The Intouchables. It was released in 2011, directed by Olivier Nakache and Éric Toledano, stars Francois Cluzet and Omar. This movie is about playing with your ears. Now, this is a fair warning. We're spoiling a 13-year-old movie, so if you haven't seen it, we will be revealing key plot points. You know, airplay is a lot of fun, I have to agree, and we could get into why that's important later.
I didn't think this is where we were going.
I love airplay.
How could you not? How could you not think this is where we were going? It's the only place we could have gone. No, all kidding aside, it's obviously a movie about relationships, right? But I think it ends up being very surprising in terms of what we're presented with at the beginning and not really getting an idea of what you're walking into. We get two characters who are, I don't know, we're almost presented with shenanigans, right? We get a car chase at the beginning. Like what is happening there? I'll admit this is not so much a review for me, and my first time seeing it, so it was a bit surprising. What was y'all reaction to just kind of getting introduced to Driz and Philippe from the aspect of a car chase?
I too have not watched this before. I was aware of it, and when I think we had gone through the description of this, I immediately recognized that it was like a trailer I had seen for an American movie, which turned out to be the remake. So I kind of had it. I had seen that trailer, so I had a gist of kind of what the idea of this movie was going to be. So it's starting off there was kind of an interesting beginning for it. It definitely had like a very dark, moody feel at the beginning. Like you almost kind of didn't know, because you know they're driving the Maserati. You have this guy driving, you have this dude with like a beard looking all kind of emo and depressed, looking out the window, you know. So you really don't know what the situation is. And then it does kind of progress into the car chase. And then you get the what would you call it? The faking out the cop moment where they try to come out, you know, my wife's pregnant, you know, type of excuse. That's why you're speeding.
Yeah, right.
And then that kind of turns into the, okay, well, this is a little bit funny. There's a relationship between these two. There's some back and forth between them because they're doing like the bet. You know, the 100 euros, I can get away. 200 euros, I can get them to escort us or whatever. So you kind of get an idea like that first 5 minutes of at least their relationship. It definitely doesn't set the tone for the movie itself. No, being a car chase, but it does, like you said, establish the relationship between them. At least you kind of see where they're at that point, right?
Yeah, knowing that this was that wasn't the flashback piece. Ultimately, that was our real time scene. I'm going to put this in quotes, not that this is a time travel movie, but then we get the story that builds up to that moment. Bobby, how did you feel about the kind of the flashback nature of this?
I did like it, and I thought it was a good idea to start at that point. I thought it gave some excitement as opposed to if it were starting just kind of showing like the main character's life a bit before kind of driving into the whole like his getting the new job with his guy. So I really liked that opening. I thought it gave some excitement, but it, you know, like you said, it was a little bit different than what I was expecting for the rest of it. But I did watch this movie before, and I thought this was going to be interesting to talk about because to me, this kind of movie isn't the type of movie that we generally watch, I would think. I mean, even though we've watched a whole bunch of different kinds of movies, but typically I'm more like the sci-fi kind of fantasy, like maybe 80s or 90s kind of guy. So I thought I would mix it up and kind of give us something a little bit different to chew on here.
Well, especially it being a foreign language, right? Like very few of those on our repertoire.
I think this is a very good mix-up. We get, as we get into it, we get Driz, who's, you know, how do I say this? In a not as favorable monetary situation when compared to Philippe, if I could put it that way. He's got the understandings we learn. He's out of prison recently. He's only applying for jobs because he wants to get the government benefit of basically proving that he's applying for work, even though he ideally doesn't want the jobs. He just wants the free money. He's got a whole bunch of siblings, I'll put that in quotes, at home that are either challenged or something's going on, and he's been away long enough that he's got a very unhappy life with his mom. But on the other side, you have, and you get that element of like Driss is he's definitely rough around the edges. And then you get Philippe, who is also just in a hard space because, long story short, the dude got hurt in a paragliding accident after losing his wife to a terminal illness. He's not exactly the happiest person alive either, and he needs someone to take care of him. And they line up a whole crew of people that technically were probably qualified on paper. And what was the most intriguing thing to Philippe was Driss. Like, as they developed this relationship, how did you feel about that first moment? Since that was the thing we needed to key off of him, basically, Driss walking in, sign my damn paper. What's up, Ginger? I'm out of here.
Well, I didn't realize until the very end when they kind of showed they had talked about it before that nobody lasts more than 2 weeks. And at the end, they kind of showed he was a little bit more downtrodden at that point, but they kind of showed more of what things were going like for him and how his caretakers were managing him. And so it was really at that point when I realized he was really looking for something different. He had probably gone through a whole bunch of these guys.
I still make the claim like I did when we first started watching is he wasn't looking for a caretaker. He was looking for a friend. And I think that became more apparent, especially towards the end.
How much though was this about almost, I don't know. Part of me was wondering when Philippe meets Driss and sees this definitely rough around the edges character that was really direct and not like any of the other people. Was there an element of Philippe wanting to change Driss, or I don't know. Part of me thought this was going to be a little bit My Fair Lady, right? Between two guys. No? Didn't feel that way?
Well,
I could see it for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that you typically get in a movie like this. It's two worlds colliding type concept, right? Driz will show Philippe, how to loosen up and how to enjoy life a little bit more. And
which is what we got, right?
And Philippe will show Driz how to take, be a little bit more sophisticated. And you're right, it does happen because he becomes more into art. He becomes a little bit more aware of culture aspects and a little bit about business and, things here or there. But I don't think that they played into it as much as I agree that I thought that they probably would. I'm glad they didn't, because I think that if they would have done that, it probably would have become a little bit more boring compared to the relationship building that I think that we got. I would almost go out on a limb to say that I think a lot of the moments, probably the more enjoyable moments in this, probably were ad-libbed. I think that it was probably just these two actors kind of cutting loose a little bit.
Well, I think through that ad-libbing, and Bobby, you could tell me how you feel, there was definitely a lot of abuse between these two to each other. I think one of the parts that had me absolutely cringing is as Driss is learning how to take care of Philippe, and then he just discovers he's going to put a hot scalding teapot on his legs and pours hot tea all over the paraplegic's body because he can't feel it. And I'm just going oh my gosh, this is cruel.
I don't think that he understood what being a quadriplegic actually was. I don't think that he fully comprehended it.
Forgive me. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. He didn't, I don't think he got it. So when he was doing it, he was he's not feeling any pain. He's yeah, that's what happens when you're paralyzed from the neck down, neck to toes. He can't feel anything. He just didn't understand. Right. It's an interesting setup for, I do feel like that Driss was probably more cruel. I feel like maybe this might have been the difference between this version and the American version. I feel like Bryan Cranston in that role probably would have threw a lot more jabs at Kevin Hart than what I think we saw in this version. I think the stuff that he threw at him was a little bit more pared back than I think what Driss dealt out. It was definitely like a 5-to-1 ratio.
Yeah.
I think that the whole way they portrayed it was that for better or worse, Philippe was probably a little bit more pampered. And so Driss's realism was kind of like a breath of fresh air in a way.
Mm-hmm. I think also they did a really good job of showing that you would think that, and they did show parts of this where basically like everybody was walking around eggshells on him. Oh, don't offend him. Don't mention his ailment. Don't mention his state or whatever they called it at one point in the beginning. But he just kind of went in there and no holds barred. Everything's off limits. Let's talk about stuff. Like it doesn't matter. And then they even went further into saying like with the scenes that I really liked where he would try to hand him the phone and he would forget that, I forget that you can't get the phone or like
this up. Yeah.
He didn't see him as just like his disability. He saw him as like a guy and you know, they did a really good job of like kind of playing into that relationship side of it.
Yeah, because instead of Philippe getting offended at the jokes that Driss would make, it was almost like he accepted it to the point of like, yeah, you know, this is kind of funny. Let's laugh together. And I think that's what helped, you know, eventually to lead to what we saw with the car scene. From Philippe's perspective, it just feels, you're right. There's a need for friendship, but they also present us with this need for love. He's very, I'd say, I guess, classical in a sense. You'll say this movie was 2011. We'll assume it takes place in that exact same time. This dude is writing the most poetic, what did they call it? What kind of love was this? Epilos? Forgetting the name.
Mind to mind.
It was mind to mind, where he is just doing the most epic poetry writing and conversing with someone with 6 months over letters.
Didn't we just we used to call that pen pals, right? Like, am I wrong?
Yeah.
That was just being a pen pal.
Right.
Would you write so wonderfully with beautiful prose to your pen pals?
Using AI, I guess.
How they got connected. Like, is there like a pen pal website? Like some kind of pen pal? Like, how do they find each other?
I'd absolutely agree. I think there's a pen pal website. We'll link in the show notes for the pen pal website.
Well, like she lived in like Dunkirk or something, right? So like that's like north France. So
which they definitely did a lot of ribbing for Dunkirk.
Right.
There was no love lost for the people of that area. Oh my gosh.
And to note, she was not aware of his situation at all. She knew nothing about, but that was vice versa. He didn't know what she looked like. They didn't even know if it was technically a she for all he really knew. It was very much just a written relationship. They didn't know anything about each other at that point.
And that was a challenge, right?
But you think he told her at the he told her at the end, right? Or like
Driss did.
Driss did, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm assuming he did and said, hey, look, like he blew you off because he was afraid you weren't going to like this, but he's a cool guy. You should try him out.
But we didn't get to see
that's
that.
That's my like screenwriting of how that scene went in between what we actually did see.
That's the hard part, right? Because he had people in his life like Magali, Audrey Fleurot, who, well, I guess in a sense is a yes person because she just took care of him and he wanted to write these letters, so she would transcribe them. But never did the thing that Driss did, which was to say, yo, just call her, my dude. You've been writing for 6 months. Like, how long are you going to keep this going?
Right.
And forcing him into a situation that makes him uncomfortable. But I think that ties so much to the fact that he didn't let go of his wife. Like, that situation is insanely hard. And
right.
I think that kind of darkness that I felt like Philippe carried through the idea that the reason he was injured is because he took a chance paragliding in a terrible situation, and he did it just because it was almost like he threw all his caution to the wind because he didn't care anymore. because he lost someone that he loves so much. Like,
Mhm.
I was like, wow, that's really heavy.
Yep.
I'm glad you feel the same way, Bobby. I'm glad you feel the same way. You know, one of the things that I know was a hook for me, and you can give me shit for it. They had just a little moment where Driss stole from Philippe, and he stole a Fabergé egg, and it's presented very early in the movie, and we don't get the resolution for it for the whole goddamn movie, and it drove me crazy.
This guy and the egg.
Crazy.
It was always the egg with this guy all the way through the end of the movie. You know, it's funny because when that happened, I was kind of surprised because when the whole setup happened, because I know he had this moment when he first kind of gets to see, because again, he came into this not really even expecting anything out of it, right? He just wanted the signature so you get the benefits. And then he got shown the world that he lives in is obviously a very picturesque mansion. It had the giant tub in the middle of the room when he went into the room, and you know, his big beds and all this kind of stuff. I kind of went to Trading Places a little bit. Like he was going to start like taking stuff and like, yeah, for sure. But all he got was that egg scene. And you're right, it didn't have a payoff in the sense of the most, I guess you could say, the payoff by the very end was that he didn't take it. He wasn't interested in the money per se. We could still question how much money he made in the job because clearly he was in that role for a while, so he had to make some money. And there ain't no way that he could say like, "Oh, I'm going to pay you minimum wage," and be like, "You see where you're at? You see what I'm doing?"
Right.
Like it's got to be worth more than that. But yeah, the egg thing, the only thing I could say is it shows that, you know, he didn't need the money at the end. It's kind of like the Willy Wonka kind of, you know, the whole thing about Willy Wonka is like he's told to steal candy. Was it the everlasting gobstopper from the thing or whatever? And if he steals it, he can get a bunch of money from the rival company, and he ends up leaving it on the desk at the end, even though he technically lost the contest and everything else. Going to show like he is a pure-hearted person. I kind of got that same feeling with the egg at the end, kind of showing that like he wasn't going to steal from him.
And that's why I think it was hard for me, because I felt the pure-heartedness was shown without the need of that egg. I guess I was already bought into it. So for me, I kept going, what's taking so long to return this thing? We already know he's a good guy.
I was kind of surprised they didn't say anything about it. Like
maybe if they would have done it like when he first left, instead of at the very end, maybe that would have made it. But I guess maybe that screenwriter was like, Austin's going to be wondering about that egg. Man, here we go. It's at the end.
I was very focused on that egg. It drove me very, very crazy. Philippe goes through motion. Eventually, the idea is that he's going to meet. What was the name of the person he was going to be in the relationship with? I already forgot.
Like, it was like. It wasn't like Elaine, but it was very similar to that.
Emile?
Eloise or something?
Emily?
Eloise? Yeah, something like that.
Nope, we got it wrong. Anyways, he stands her up. Like he kind of dismisses Driz and tries to go have a date and drinks whiskey and eventually gets Yvonne to say, let's get the hell out of Dodge. And he goes and has a date with Driz, right? This is the paragliding date, right? Isn't that what happens at that moment? They fly in the plane and they go paragliding. Am I confusing my moments?
Well, so the whole thing about it was right, like, so Driz very much was driving him to meet her in person. So first off to talk to her, then to send a picture to her. Driz thinks that he sends a picture of him in the wheelchair, but he ends up pulling it behind Driz's back and puts a picture of him before the accident. Sends that. They decide.
Like, when they were on the plane, I thought like it meant that it was implied that she blew him off.
No, he blew her off.
No, I know, I know that's what happened, but like from like the impression that Driz got was that
that he had okay,
that she blew him off.
So let's have a guys' night out after
basically
getting rejected.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
But that was never.
It was never explicitly stated.
No, but basically, he's
you would think Driz would have asked him about it.
Ask the question like,
And
how
like,
did the day
yeah,
go?
yeah, how are your ears
and
doing?
he'd just say it didn't happen or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, yeah, the whole reason why he told Driz not to come with him is because Driz would have probably pushed it. He wouldn't have let him chicken out like he did.
Yeah.
Right.
So the fact that Driz didn't follow up with it, it feels like something probably had to happen in between.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That would have diverted him away from it. So either like, yeah, she blew me off, or she didn't like me, or wait and see, or something. Because otherwise, he was such a driving force in it to get it to happen that it feels weird that he just kind of didn't bring up again until much later when it appears he figures out what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the opportunity that Driz had and knowing that, so his discovery that it didn't work out properly is because he's handed his papers at the end. I forgot what it was, but it had the photo that he originally wanted Philippe to send, which is him in the wheelchair. And that's what clues him in that, oh, maybe I do need to get this fixed. But before we even get there, thinking of Driz and knowing their first conversation was around music, and they have this like lovely scene of Philippe trying to force him to listen to all this classical music, and he's just like, oh, I kind of recognize this. This is from a commercial, right? And this is from like a TV show, and he's kind of bored by it, and eventually starts playing Earth, Wind, and Fire, and just has everyone dancing. And I don't know, I thought that was a pretty cool moment because they tied back to that conversation, and Driz is really kind of building up. I think you mentioned the culture part of it, to the point where he is painting, and you get all these moments from the other people in the house going, wait, he's painting? What is he painting? This guy paints? What's happening here? To the point where that plane scene we're talking about, where they ditch, Philippe cons his, I'm going to say cons, which sounds terrible.
No, it was
but cons
totally
his buddy into buying a piece of art, of Driz's art, for 11,000 euro, right? Philippe is a good friend, right?
Yeah, it was funny how he's like, wow, I'm such a great artist. And Philippe was like, yeah, slow down there, big guy. Like,
I guess if the opportunity presents itself, right, you work for a guy like this, you might as well dabble in his world, right?
Yeah. I mean, you're immersed in it. And I think the thing that kind of happened between the two is obviously whenever you have worlds colliding, you tend to have the characters start enjoying some aspect of it. So obviously with Driz, I think he started enjoying art a little bit more. I mean, the fact that he recognized the dolly, right? Like, it completely unprompted or anything like that. He recognized it. I think he started kind of enjoying. He kind of saw why, because that was one of the questions that Philippe asked him was like, why do you think people enjoy art? And Driz was like, the business. But I think by the end of it, he started kind of seeing that there is something more internal about art that everyone brings to it. Like, art is one of the things where, like, even if we both looked at the same painting, we'd probably take something different away from it. Right. So I think he started kind of getting that portion of it. Whereas like Philippe started coming out of a shell a little bit more. I like, would Philippe have gone paragliding again had it not met Driz? Right. Like, I think that like he kind of had to, in order to kind of get, because I mean, that's the thing that kind of, maybe not entirely ruined his life, but definitely made his life significantly harder. Granted, he's still in his, Fabergé castle. If you're going to be a quadrilogic, being a rich one is probably the best way to go.
Right.
But at the same time, I do think that, you do kind of get that occurring. It wasn't a good buddy moment, I guess, between the two of them. I think even the paragliding thing was, I think, a good moment too, to kind of show their relationship as it had developed. Kind of reminded me of the bucket list a little bit, like going outside of your comfort barrier to do something, and obviously them enjoying it for as crazy as it is, right?
I mean, speaking of crazy, I guess I'm going to ask, have you been paragliding, and or would you do it?
Haven't done it. Would I do it? I would do it over bungee jumping, but
it all sounds terrifying to me. I'll be the first to admit.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure, like, I'd probably do it above a lot of other things for sure. I've seen it done quite a bit. I've been around, like, whenever you'll hear it first, right? And then like you'll see people going around, and like, it looks fun. I probably would do. I'd probably
It does look fun, especially here because he had the GoPro Driz.
Yeah.
And you're like, actually, this looks like it would be super cool, but also terrifying.
I mean, I'd probably have to build up to it. Like I'd probably have to, let's see, I'd have to start with like going on a hot air balloon first, probably. And then I'll have to do the one where they're like, you're being tugged behind a boat and then you have the glider.
Okay.
I'll do that next.
It's very
because it's tethered. Hey, as long as there's no pterodactyls or anything anywhere, I'm good. And then maybe I'd get to that. Like I have to work my way up, I think. I don't think I'm going to be able to just cold turkey just jump right into it probably. Unless, like, yeah.
The idea of it seems so uncomfortable. I do want to ask about the pulling Driss away, where his family kind of pulls him back and Philippe says, maybe it's time for us to end this. And to just create that gap. So it showed the thing you were talking about, Bobby, where we see the turnover for all the other attendants who work with him.
I didn't like that at all.
Yes, I was going to say I was frustrated by it.
I thought like there was going to be some kind of like, I don't the coldness of it just felt like there should be more emotion in it. It was like, I know he's like, look, like you can't do this forever. You've got your own family you have to attend to, but I don't know. Was that like a test to see if he'd come back and they'd still be friends? Like something bothered me about that, the way it was done.
It's funny. Like, I think I was even bothered before that by like, I figured that situation would probably occur, to be honest. But how it occurred felt sort of weird to me because like you had, like, I get it. His brother cousin was in trouble with gangs or whatever, but like, Driss has been gone for a while. That was the whole crux of the relationship drama that he had with his mom aunt. So him being gone shouldn't have been that weird, if you ask me. Like, I would have been more on board with it if the mom aunt had gotten sick or something. Yeah. Or like was on death's bed or something, something that would have pulled him back, that would have required him to. And like, that's where Philippe would be like, no, go. Like, that's like, believe me, somebody who's lost a loved one, you need to go do that. Like, you can't be here with a complete stranger. And that didn't happen. It just felt kind of awkwardly placed for some reason.
Yeah, tell me if I'm off with this, and I think I mentioned it, but there's this element of like, I feel like this could be a TV show, and only because we do get this building of the relationship between Philippe and Driss, and that's great. But there's all these little things that we were talking about, Bobby, that you've inferred that I actually wouldn't mind watching. I wouldn't mind watching him learn more about the art and more of the stuff with the music. I wouldn't mind watching more detail with him and his aunt, mom, cousin, brothers, and the detail of that drama in the house. And so I'm adding episodes here. You could tell. Yeah, maybe it's like an 8-episode series.
They never mentioned like his family until the very end. He said, "Oh, that's not my real name." Like, "Oh, and here's my family situation." And it's like, wait, did they never talk about this before? Like, it was only about joking around and figuring out doing.
Sometimes you want to joke with your boss and still get paid.
Right, maybe but it seemed like the type of relationship where they would share stuff with each other.
Yeah, because I mean, it obviously gets to that point, which I think we could, talk about that finish of Driz bringing the letter girlfriend to him, and you get this smile on Philippe's face of just joy because he's going to have the conversation he was supposed to have forever with her. But were you happy with that kind of resolution that they presented?
Yeah, I mean, it's another one of those things where they leave it up to interpretation, right? Like they don't tell you how it's going to go. And so there's something neat about that where you can kind of come up with an idea in your head. Like me, I think it works out, like that's just the kind of
this is like the Inception moment with the top. You're just like watching it like, is it going to topple? I mean, it kind of, I don't know, like, I guess kind of circling on something we haven't talked about is the fact that at the very beginning of this says based on a true story. And so at the very end, they did have the little title cards that said that the person that Philippe was based on, who I think actually was Philippe, if I remember correctly, like had gotten remarried and had 2 kids or something. Doesn't necessarily say it was with her, but did imply that he did.
It's implied that he has like a happy life going on. He's not just like by himself, going through caretakers every other
Mhm.
week, trying to just get by. Seems like he tries to get out of his shell and have a life.
It does seem sort of weird though, because it almost kind of implies the moment like, oh, well, this is the last time these two are going to see each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was like, but why? Like, you still live within probably driving distance. Last time I checked, you had a freaking private jet, like,
Right.
and
Right.
a fleet
you're
of
right.
cars. And
Because the even with those end credits that we see, they actually imply like Driss starts his own like caretaking business, right? And then it's like they've remained friends, but it does seem like they don't remain like the closest of friends the way we're presented. I think that'll kind of be my final question, because we don't really know how much embellishment do you think we just watched on a scale of
compared to the true
percentage?
story.
Yeah.
I don't think that I can't remember what because they didn't use the same name. It was a completely different name.
Yeah.
Like a tour or something like that was the guy's name.
Yeah.
Like, I guarantee you he wasn't as charismatic as Driss was. Like he definitely was probably more of a stick in the mud probably in real life. But what do I know? Maybe that dude was dancing on that floor just as much to American music.
Yes.
Earth, Wind, and Fire.
American music in the French film.
Is that the one thing that probably is true? Is the basis of the story and Earth, Wind, and Fire? Those are the only things that are probably actually. I think that there's probably it's probably like 95% embellishment. Probably it's probably like they like the idea of the story, and then the rest of it was purely just them taking creative license.
Get you in a Maserati. Yep.
The Maserati is probably real. That's probably.
You're like, if anything is real, it's that. Bobby, are you recommending The Intouchables?
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of movie that, you know, it feels good to watch. It's really uplifting. It's a neat story. It had me engaged throughout all of it. Like you said, like Omar's character was really fun to watch, and I enjoyed it. I recommend watching it.
Matt?
I agree. I was pleasantly surprised. I hadn't seen this before, so I didn't have, any expectations going in. I would be interested to see what they did for the American version, just out of curiosity after this. I kind of get the feeling that the heart probably won't be there. Like I love Bryan Cranston as an actor. Kevin Hart, we'll see. But yeah, I mean, I think this movie, like obviously you have to kind of get through the fact that it is in French. So you're either French or you're open to reading subtitles. I never like watching dubs for these kind of things because it just never seems to really hold up. I think that it's worth a watch. I think that if you can find, I don't know where you'd probably find this. I assume somewhere streaming, potentially, maybe Amazon Prime or something. But I think it's worth the watch. I think that it's definitely not going to probably shock you or push any boundaries you might have for films in general. It's definitely not a Citizen Kane or anything like that. I mean, it's basically an updated French version of Driving Miss Daisy in a way. But on the other hand, I think that we laughed quite a bit watching this.
We did.
So you're definitely probably going to enjoy it and just enjoy the hour 52 that you get out of it, I think.
Yeah, I think the key word you mentioned that was weighing on my mind, but I should say weighing on my heart, a little bit of the final piece of Captain Planet there. Yes, to me it's the heart. It's this thing of just feeling good about the relationships you have with people, and especially I think seeing two people from the different worlds kind of collide in such a way of them building a love for each other and a care for each other. The transformation with Driss, who went from I don't want to touch this man to putting the compress on his forehead and having that like tender touch. I was like, this is actually really cool to watch. So I'm also in the camp of recommending this movie. Yes, it's got subtitles. You can power through it. Enjoy the French language. It's worth listening to. Ignore the German parts. They're concerning. But outside of that, I think it's definitely worth watching, and I'll recommend it. As always, thank you for listening. And my true disability is not having to be in a wheelchair. It's having to be without her.